Remember that they're changing my voice and I'm not gay. All the races, all the different inhabitants of the earth are trying to benefit from the situation. And they're trying to make it harder to listen to me so they can pretend that they're doing something. Very arrogant people. Rich English people are very much involved. Rich Americans, rich Jews, rich Israelis, rich white people, what have you. Now, as promised, this video is about the different times I came across Indian people in my life. And there's a pattern here. Obviously, they're not the only group that's involved here. And the people who are doing it, the main people doing it are best described as white, Jewish, and LGBT. And there's rich crypto Jews, other rich token minorities helping them, what have you. So first it starts in Montessori school, which is before pre-kindergarten. You know, maybe I was like 3 years old. I had an Indian teacher there, and I used to clash with the different kids there. And one of the kids' name was Jason. This is significant because later when I go to boarding school and have a crush on these two Indian sisters, the younger one's name is Amy, right? Aim-E. E is for feminine and masculine, silly, goofy, sissy, all the different E words, shady, sketchy, what have you, right? Evil, E-V-I-L. Anyway, so she dates a black guy from South Central named Jason. So that there's a connection. There's an example of how these things are connected. And if you look at the pattern, you see that there's definitely a pattern that is consistent throughout all this. So again, my first teacher that I can remember as a kid was this Indian Montessori school teacher. And she actually went to my plays when I went to Cardin after Montessori. She went to my early plays, and she very much liked me and my brothers. And at that school I clashed with various white kids, and one of them's name was Jason. He was like the ringleader. Ironically, right, ringleader. So then there was Prathap. I think it was in my brother's class. He was a very kind of nerdy student, right? But got good grades, what have you. Seemed like a nice guy. There was the Simpson cartoons, right? The Indian person in the Simpson cartoons was racist white people making fun of Indians using the 7-Eleven guy. Then there was Chris Corona from Cardin. He was one of my first best friends, and it connects to the idea of the coronavirus. That goes back to Chris Corona. The word Chris is like the word Christ, and Corona means crown, kor, on, a, virus. If you look at Genesis 41:45, on is Ayunu, aka Heliopolis, which was Ra's cult center, where Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the high priest of Ra, was given to Joseph in the Bible as a wife. And Pharaoh is the one who gave her to him, and God didn't punish Pharaoh or Joseph for marrying Asenath, the daughter of the high priest of Ra. Okay, so I'm going to have to make this part outside because I was interrupted. I know there's birds chirping in the background. You can turn down the volume a little bit if you want. Okay, so next was Patrima. Now, after I went from Cardin with Chris Corona as my best friend at the time to country school, he still kept being my best friend, basically. And Patrima was another Indian person in our class. It was a female. I didn't really know her that well. Me and Chris used to talk about, Chris and I used to talk about females, and he would say, hey, look, I can get a hug from her whenever I want. And that's kind of strange, has some kind of meaning. If I remember anything, I'll put in the description of the comments. Okay, so then next was Sonia, when I went to Webb boarding school, and she was friends with one of my friends, Garrett. And there was also Anita, who I danced with at, I danced with some dance at the school. She was also Indian. She was very dark-skinned. Now Sonia, I think, was dating who was perhaps my best friend at that school at the time, which was Terry. It was Terry Price. There was also Amy and Shalini, those two Indian females that I had a crush on. First I was rejected by Shalini, and I went back and told Steve Kim, who's this big Japanese guy with dark skin, and he saw me kind of looking, he saw me looking sad, and he said, what happened? And I kind of told him, and he said, okay, I'm going to go tell her about herself, which, I didn't think it was a good idea, but I thought that I think he said I'm going to go talk to her something, I don't remember, but then she says, that, this guy talked to her and so on and so forth, so it wasn't like, I didn't want him to give her a hard time or something, but anyway, you have this A, line A, right, and of course the Lini is like the word, the lime, and the next part E, the derogatory term for English people, right? So there's something there, and she also seemed very English washed. Her and her little sister, and her little sister dated Jason, was from South Central, what have you. And she also brought up at the dance. She was like, "You look like you're very hot," because I was wearing a sweater, and um, it was the summertime. It was very hot, and I said, "Oh, I'm from a hot place." Da da da. I don't remember why I was wearing the sweater. Maybe because it made it so I looked a certain way or something. I don't remember that part. And strangely enough, because of they're doing something in my clothes, I end up wearing sweaters a lot, and I don't really wear a shirt underneath. I end up wearing two sweaters. Okay. So then there was Neil. He was an Indian guy who went to Webb as well. He was similar to a Pratap in certain ways. A certain type of Indian guy who's kind of nerdy with kind of bigger ears, what have you. So I briefly dated a female named Nikki Gascon, right? Her name is a play on words for gaze con and gas con, not a coincidence. And she, at the time I didn't really cut my hair very well, so she was like, you look good except for your hair or something. Like, she's like, what's with the hair? Eventually, me and her just stopped talking to each other, and she starts talking to this Indian guy who, I don't remember his name, but he was like in the rap, and he was like a Sikh. He wore that kind of, he wore that thing on his head that resembles like a beanie or a do-rag to some degree or something, that kind of Sikh thing or whatever that is. And I didn't care. I wasn't like, hey, why? Because I was crushing on other females. For whatever reason, I didn't care very much about it. Now, then there was also Sandeep, and he had said something to the effect of that he was also an African, right? Okay, I keep getting interrupted here, so I believe I left off. Okay, so I keep getting interrupted here. I believe I left off talking about the Indian gentleman with the headpiece that was like a do-rag ish, right? Okay, so after that, I leave Webb during my sophomore year. That's the boarding school, right, in Southern California, in Claremont by LA, what have you. I come back to Northern California, and that's when I start dating Janu, who, whose mother is a gynecologist, and so she's a doctor, and she was friends with my father. And her father was the secretary who worked for her mother, while my mother's a doctor, right? Now, the only reason I bring this up is, I don't care about these kind of superficial titles people have. I mean, there's something to be said about a doctor, okay? It is because of the nature of the situation here. So what ends up happening is I end up breaking up with her, and then she ends up dating Devo, who growing up was like my second best friend, right? It was my neighbor was like my best friend, and then he was like my second best friend. And so she went to school with my neighbor and ended up dating Devo, right? Devon, whose name was like Demon. And I met Devon through my neighbor. Okay. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting here. So it was like she was dating me because at the time I identified as a gang member, right? I hung out with various Crips to various, on various occasions, and I started my own gang, what have you. And she was mad because she wanted to be in that gang, and I didn't think that females should be in a gang, and so on and so forth. And so eventually we break up. Like I kept leaving her and then coming back, getting back with her, leaving her, getting back with her, because I didn't really want to be with her, and I was in love with a female I met at Live Oak, who's a key part of the story, Maria Mello. Okay, and who would have thought she would have mellowed me out, right? And they like these kind of wordplay games, right? And I'm over her and so on and so forth. So around that time, I carve a broken heart into my forearm under my, back of my wrist. Okay, so at some point, there's these Indian people downtown. Not Indian people, white people downtown. There's two tall, white, kind of English-looking, gayish-looking white guys, and they say, "Hey, you're not a gangster. You look like an Indian or something." And I think they say something to the effect of, "Why do you think I'm saying this to you?" And I'm like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And then later on, there's this Indian guy. He looks like a Sikh. He looks like the guy back from boarding school who dated Nikki, right? My ex-girlfriend from the time. And I didn't like get anywhere with that Nikki chick. Didn't kiss her, nothing. Didn't hold hands, nothing. We just started talking. So she wasn't really my girlfriend. Now, he's in some fancy car with some fancy Indian female who's attractive, right? And they're playing some, this Snoop Dogg song where he says, "I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea about me. I don't have nothing to hide. I want the world to see," right? And he says that he's a gangster and he's a Crip and so on and so forth. And he's surrounded by guys in red, almost certainly Bloods, judging by the situation. And I start kind of dancing in front of his car because I'm like faded or something. I'm with Rahel, my female at the time, my girlfriend at the time, who was the female I was with the longest. And for whatever reason, I felt like, I'm like, look, I don't care. At the time, I had a certain mentality where if my anger flared up, I didn't care about things. I'd estimate the situation and say, okay, let's see how they respond to this. And he turns off the music and he's like, I'm with them, right? And so there's all these guys in red. They're probably from, I don't know where they're from. They're Bloods to some degree in San Francisco, the RBL posse. It's a story for another day. Okay. So these things all kind of connect together a certain way. I don't think being a gangster is smart, or I don't think it's cool or anything like that. I'm just telling the story here. I stopped identifying as a gangster in 2015. Okay, so there was those downtown incidents that seemed to connect together. They seemed to connect to Johnny, right? And of course, the guy had a fancy car and there's a bunch of Bloods. Now, when you're a great warrior, you don't think in terms of who makes more money than who, and you don't think that you should use a beta scale like who gets money, because especially when you're black, because everyone knows that people are jealous of black people and they kind of hold them down. So I'm guessing that people were orchestrating it behind the scenes, and maybe they wanted me to kind of connect it to my ex-girlfriend. Incidentally, not far from that place, one of her friends named Mike, he got killed by some Asians, probably some Asian Crips downtown. Again, I don't think it's fly. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think, hey, take that. I don't feel one way or another about it. I didn't know her that well by that time. And my older brother still maintained being friends with her or something. Okay, my neighbor still was friends with her. Okay, he messed around with her later or something like that. I think she's married now or something. And she had said to me that she doesn't date black guys anymore, and that she's gonna have a traditional marriage and so on and so forth. Okay, so the last time I talked to her, incidentally, and I'm going way over time, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up quickly. She had said something that rubbed me wrong. Oh, she said that she was 10 steps ahead of every guy she ever dated. So I was kind of playing that off. I'm with my neighbor, with her, what have you. And, at her house where she still, or where she was visiting her parents at the time. And then, so when I go back to my house and I'm filling up with hatred, I kind of text her, and I text her some rude messages or something, telling her about herself. And so then we stopped talking, right? Okay, so I also had a teacher I had two teachers in my school. One of them looked like the guy who killed his wife, who was an Indian guy. Eventually my family becomes close to this Indian family, and they come over to the house all the time, more than like any other people that come over, basically. And the father kills the mother, and he looks like one of the Indian teachers at my school, and the other Indian teacher looks like another person who I'm not going to get into that story there. He also looks like another person who was at this hospital I was at, right? And so they try to connect it a certain way, and there seems to be a recurring thing of just kind of confusing things, at times they seem to be trying to flare up some kind of rivalry based on money and power. You have that kind of TV series, the Game of Thrones, right? But I'm Christ. Do you think I'm competing with, King Charles or, Prince Harry or William? So they're just, colonists. They're just, in the human story, they're white people, right? They brought the concrete jungle. They're not very indigenous in terms of, being like Africans or Indians or certain Asians who are in nature, Native Americans. So they're not competing for the ideal person, because as a consequence of colonialism, right, they gave up their connection to nature. And even right now, white Jew and LGBT people are persecuting the most righteous person to ever live. After in the Bible it said that those types of people crucified Christ in their own story. So there's no competition, right? I'm the king of indigenous people, I'm the king of all people, I'm the king of kings. And they're just some silly English people playing a game. So that needs to be understood. And that's part of the problem in society. One of the major problems in the world today is that people placate these arrogant rich white people, rich Jews, rich LGBT people, instead of telling the truth about these things. So I went way over time here because there's these sort of white, Jewish, and LGBT sort of fraternity people throwing fits, and they're doing childish, gay things that are best described as gays throwing a fit to be obnoxious, to interfere. It's like a gay person who's mad that I'm not telling things in a way that helps them turn out little boys and helps them pressure people at work to be gay, to keep their job and stuff like this. And so they're throwing fits to interfere. Let me just shoot through this really fast here. So there was an incident at the Egghead computer store that used to be over there in West San Jose or so. And there was an Indian female that walked up. She was very attractive. She was similar to a female who had a choker around her neck who was also Indian. She was taller than her, and it looked like her mother worked at the local store over there that I went all the time. Now there's various connections here, so I'm gonna have to shoot through this. It's gonna come out a certain way. If you have any questions, put in the comments. But I have to just go through this and get this done with. It's very annoying to have all these psychopaths, these racists, and these people who don't like heterosexual people harassing me all the time. Okay, so one of the most important connections here was this female who was from Fremont, because one of the victims of the incident in Santa Cruz was from Fremont. The other one was from San Jose. So this female was claimed to be targeted, right, in the gang stalking campaign, the government harassment campaign. It's called gang stalking. It's like to shift the blame. It's not gangs behind it. It's the government behind it. Okay. Okay, she was from Fremont, right? And I actually went to school. When I went back to college, the first campus I went to was a Fremont campus. So they're making it very difficult for me to talk. Okay, again, if you have sense when you look at this, it's very straightforward. They're making it harder for me to speak because they're jealous, because I'm smarter than they are, because I'm Christ, and there's some kind of jealous worms. Okay, because I'm not gay, because I'm not white, because I'm not Jewish. They want to pretend that their videos are better. There's some kind of groupies, there's some kind of hyper, privileged, false sense of entitlement bitches. Okay. And part of why I emphasize things like the things I just emphasized is because they're giving me a hard time. It's very fair. If you think otherwise, put in the comments. I'll end it there.